My name is Nora Halstead. I was 27 years old. I held a degree in architecture from a state university where I'd graduated second in my class, and I was taking orders for the breakfast special at the Linfield Diner on Alderton Avenue when my father walked through the door. He stopped just past the threshold. The morning light came through the plate glass behind him and made it hard to see his face for a moment. I saw the suit first, the same charcoal wool he wore to every civic function, every ribbon cutting, every handshake with the kind of men who put other men's names on buildings. Then his eyes adjusted and he saw the apron. He didn't say anything. He just looked. I had been looking for that look for 2 years without knowing it. The thing that would finally tell me what I already suspected but couldn't prove. It lasted only a second before he smoothed his expression back into something neutral. But I had seen it. It wasn't surprise. It was recognition. The quiet, settled recognition of a man who knew exactly why I was standing there with a coffee pot in my hand and no firm in Harwick willing to return a phone call. I turned and walked to another table. My hand didn't shake. That part still surprised me. I should tell you what I had been before I tell you what I became. At Pemberton State, I was the student professors asked to present at department reviews. My thesis, a low-cost modular housing framework adapted for Midwest floodplain lots, was cited in 2 subsequent graduate papers. My advisor, a woman named Dr. Carla Finch who did not give praise easily or often, told me on graduation day that I had a particular mind for problems that looked impossible on paper. I remember how she said it. Standing in the parking lot, her robe unzipped in the heat, holding her coffee with both hands. The kind of mind, she said, that firms will fight over. They had not fought over me. My father was Gerald Halstead. He ran Halstead Design Associates, which had been a mid-sized residential firm in Harwick for 30 years. He knew everyone. He attended every chamber luncheon, served on the county planning committee, refereed disputes at zoning hearings with the patient authority of a man who had been right so many times that being right had become less a position than a posture. He was good at the posture. I had watched him hold it my entire life. He had not offered me a position at Halstead Design when I graduated. He said the firm wasn't ready to take on new staff. He said it warmly, with one hand on my shoulder, looking just past my ear the way he did when he was saying something he'd already decided and didn't want questioned. I thanked him and let it go. I had spent 4 years learning how to solve difficult problems on paper. I assumed the professional world operated with similar logic, that merit and a well-prepared portfolio would do the rest. I applied to 9 other firms in Harwick and the surrounding county. None of them called back. I applied to 4 more over the next 6 months. 2 sent form rejections. 2 said nothing. I took the job at the Linfield Diner because my rent was due and because I told myself it was temporary. 14 months later I was still there. My grandmother, Ruth Halstead, my father's mother, which people always found surprising, had died 18 months before my graduation. She left me her house on Ferris Creek Road and a cedar box that sat at the top of her hall closet. The house went to probate for reasons I was still untangling. The cedar box I picked up from the attorney's office the week after the funeral, took home and set on my kitchen shelf without opening. I don't know why I didn't open it. I think I wasn't ready to be inside her things yet. It sat there for 2 years and 4 months while I carried plates and refilled coffee cups and kept my drafting software current on a laptop I balanced on my kitchen table at night, working through problems that no one had hired me to solve. The work I had done for my father's firm I would not call formal employment. It was the kind of contribution that happens in families before anyone has thought to write it down. The weekend I spent reworking the elevation drawings for the Kellerman project when his draftsman quit without notice. The 3 months I reviewed permit applications for a subdivision development and flagged 7 compliance errors that would have cost the firm its timeline. I had also spent the better part of a summer cross-referencing site measurements against county code revisions on a commercial conversion project, work that would have taken an outside contractor significantly longer and cost accordingly. I did these things because I was asked, because it was family, because I thought that was what you did. I did not invoice anyone. I did not ask for credit on the project files. I had also served, in the way daughters of successful men sometimes serve without being appointed to anything, as a kind of proof of the firm's quality. present at presentations, introduced at dinners, the detail that communicated something about Gerald Halstead's household that he wanted communicated. I understood this only later. What I did not understand during those years was that I was also being used as a ledger entry. My father had a habit I discovered only much later. When he needed to reduce the appearance of profit in any given quarter, he created internal accounts. Loans, he called them. Repayments. His accountant knew. The figures were small enough individually to avoid scrutiny. Over 3 years, he had run $18,340 through accounts labeled with my name, money the firm had spent on things unrelated to me, reclassified as loans extended to Nora Halstead, repayable on demand. A separate adjustment entry, made the year I graduated, shifted an additional $4,215 through the same mechanism. I did not know either figure existed until a Thursday morning in March. What I did know, for the 2.5 years I carried plates at the Linfield Diner, was that something had gone wrong in a way I could not locate. I kept my portfolio current. I kept my references current. I sent applications, followed up at the right interval, presented myself correctly at the 2 informational interviews I managed to obtain. Each time something stopped. A hiring manager who had seemed interested went cold after a second conversation I was not part of. A referral that a professor had placed went nowhere. The pattern was there. I could see its shape. I just couldn't find its source. The informational interviews were the ones that stayed with me. The first was at a small firm on Renwick Street that did residential additions and historic renovation work. The principal had been warm at the meeting itself, had asked specific questions about my thesis, had taken notes. Then, about 10 days later, I received a brief email saying the firm had decided to pause hiring. I followed up once, at the 2-week mark, and heard nothing. The second interview was similar. A project manager at a mid-sized commercial firm who had seemed genuinely interested in my permit review experience, then gone quiet in a way that felt deliberate rather than merely busy. I spent several evenings trying to identify what I had said or done wrong, reviewing my notes from both conversations, finding nothing. The absence of a reason is its own kind of information. I had learned to read it the way you learn to read weather, not as a single sign but as a pattern of things not happening that should have. And then one evening, sitting at the counter after a closing shift, I opened my email and found an interview request from Carver and Moss Architecture. He came in on a Tuesday. It was the slow part of the morning, after the rush before the lunch crowd, and I was refilling the syrup dispensers at the service station when I heard the bell above the door. I looked up. He was already looking at me. My father stood just inside the Linfield Diner with the particular stillness of a man who is prepared for a conversation. He was wearing the charcoal suit again. He sat down at the counter, 2 stools away from where I was working, and I set the syrup bottle down and waited. "I heard you're still here," he said. "I am," I said. "Your mother is worried." "About what specifically?" I said. He picked up the menu. He already knew what was on it. "You graduated 2 years ago," he said without looking up. "This isn't what we expected for you." "I've applied to every firm in Harwick," I said. "They don't call back." "Maybe your approach needs work," he said. He set the menu down. "Some of these places, it's not just credentials. It's relationships. It's reputation." Something went still in my chest. Not anger, not bitterness. Something more like the moment before you understand a language you've been hearing for years. "Whose reputation?" I said. He looked at me then. "Not long. I'm saying you may have left some impressions that are hard to walk back. Early on." "What impressions?" I said. "Nora." He said my name the way he always said it when he wanted to close a door. Flat, patient, final. "You were given advantages that other people in this city work decades for. You had access. You had my name. And what you did with that," he shook his head. The gesture was small. "People remember." "What did I do?" I said. He looked at the counter. "You took things that weren't yours to take. In the firm. Materials, access, resources. I handled it quietly because you're my daughter. But word gets around in a field this small." I said nothing. I heard the coffee maker run through its cycle. I heard the cook pull a pan off the back burner. The words were in the room now, and I was letting them sit there. The way you leave something on the table when you need to see it in full light before you decide what to do with it. I never took anything, I said. I'm not here to argue about the past. He folded his hands on the counter. I'm here because I think there's a path forward if you're willing to be practical. The firm has administrative work. Not design, but... I'm not interested in administrative work, I said. Then I don't know what to tell you. He stood. He straightened his jacket with both hands, the gesture he made at the end of meetings. You could have been something here. You still could if you weren't so ungrateful for what you were given. He paused. Think about it. He left. The bell above the door rang twice, once when it opened, once when it swung back. I stood at the service station. The syrup bottle was still in my hand. The bottom of it left a ring on the counter when I set it down. The interview was confirmed for Thursday, 11:14 a.m. I wrote the address on a notepad, Carver and Moss, 340 Belhus Drive, 3rd floor. I pressed my gray blazer and hung it on the back of the bedroom door. I made coffee and drank half of it standing at the kitchen window, watching the light move across the building across the alley. I checked the transit schedule, wrote the departure time on the same notepad, and set it on the counter where I would see it in the morning. I opened my portfolio on the kitchen table and went through it one last time, not to change anything but to remember what I had done. The floodplain thesis. The permit review documentation I had kept copies of. 3 personal projects I had worked on during the diner years, problems I had solved on evenings and weekends without anyone asking me to. I closed the portfolio. I set the notepad on top of it. I stood at the kitchen shelf and looked at the cedar box. I had been looking at it, in the way you look at something without fully admitting you are looking at it, for 2 years. It was small. Worn at the corners. The wood had a smell I had first noticed the day I brought it home from the attorney's office and then stopped noticing, the way you stop noticing the things that are always present. I lifted it down. I opened the cedar box and found, beneath a folded dish towel and a packet of letters I recognized as my grandfather's, a manila envelope with my name written on the front in my grandmother's hand. The gummed flap had dried and resealed itself over the years. I ran my thumbnail slowly along the seam to open it without tearing what was inside. I looked at what was in it. I read the first page. I put it in my bag. I drove to Belhus Drive. The conference room at Carver and Moss had a long table and windows that faced north, so the light was even and cool. There were 3 people waiting when I was shown in. The woman on the left introduced herself as the hiring manager. The man in the center said his name was Douglas Moss. He studied me for a moment after we shook hands. Not the way interviewers usually study a candidate, measuring, calculating, but the way people look when they're checking something they already know against what they're seeing. "You're Ruth Halstead's granddaughter," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am," I said. He nodded slowly. "She came to see me," he said. 15 years ago. Maybe 16. She sat in this office. We were on the 2nd floor then, and she told me about a girl who was 12 years old and had started redrawing the house plans her father left on the kitchen table because she thought she could fix the load-bearing issues in the east wall. He paused. She said she wanted someone to know, in case it mattered later. He reached into the folder in front of him. He took out a tablet and opened it. On the screen was a scanned document, aged paper, my grandmother's handwriting on the cover page, and beneath it what appeared to be several pages of dense notation. He turned the tablet to face me and laid it flat on the table between us. "She left this with me," he said. "She asked me to keep it until the time was right. I didn't know when that would be. Then, 3 weeks ago, I got a call from Gerald Halstead asking me, very politely, very collegially, to confirm that we weren't considering any candidates named Halstead for our current openings. He said there were character concerns. He said he was looking out for us. He watched me read the first page of what was on the screen. My grandmother had been, among other things, meticulous. The document was 15 years old. It was a letter, 6 pages, addressed to no one specific and everyone generally, describing in the clear and patient language of a woman who had run a household and watched a business from the inside for 40 years, exactly what she had observed her son doing with accounts, with reputations, and with the people around him who were too close to see it clearly. She had named figures. She had named dates. She had named me in a paragraph near the end as someone who would one day need this to exist. She had also, in a separate envelope clipped to the back, included a copy of the county property records for the Ferris Creek Road house, with a handwritten note indicating that the property's title had been structured specifically to pass to me outside of Gerald Halstead's ability to intervene, and that any attempt to reclassify estate assets through third-party loan instruments should be treated as the document's corroboration, not its rebuttal. The room was quiet. The hiring manager had her hands folded on the table. The way he implies things, a younger man I had not been introduced to, he's been doing it for 2 years, was looking at a point just past my left shoulder. Across every firm in Harwick. She knew, I said. I know, she knew, Douglas Moss said. He looked at his hiring manager. I looked at the table for a moment. We're going to need to have some conversations about the county planning committee. Not relief, not vindication. But that's not why you're here today. Something more like the recognition of weight you've been carrying so long you forgot it had a name. You're here because your grandmother told you I was 15 years ago, I said, and because I'd like to see what you've been working on. I opened my portfolio. What my father called me was a thief. What my grandmother called me, in 6 pages of careful handwriting, was prepared. Those are different words for the same girl sitting at a kitchen table at 12 years old, fixing what the grown-ups had gotten wrong, and what she did with the years between then and now was her own business. No one's to take, no one's to reclassify. I slid my first project sheet across the table. 6 months later, I sat at a drafting station on the 3rd floor of Carver and Moss with a pencil case open beside my keyboard. It was my grandmother's. Worn brown leather, the initials RMH stamped into the flap, the stamp slightly off-center because my grandfather had done it himself, pressed too hard on the right side. The stitching along the bottom seam had been resewn, a slightly different thread color visible if you looked closely, which I did often. She had carried it through 2 moves and the house fire that took the back addition of the Ferris Creek Road property in 1987. It had survived because she had taken it with her when she went to the neighbors to use the phone. I kept my own pencils in it now. It sat at the top left corner of my station where I could see it. My father called once, in the 1st month. He left a voicemail. His voice was measured, warm, the civic version of himself. He said he'd heard I'd landed somewhere and he was glad for me, that family was family, that perhaps we could find a time to talk. He said he'd been under a great deal of pressure and that some things had perhaps not been handled ideally. He did not use the word sorry. He used the word unfortunate. He used the phrase moving forward. I did not call back. I did not delete the message for several weeks, which surprised me. Then I deleted it. The Ferris Creek Road property cleared probate in the 4th month. The title transferred cleanly, exactly as my grandmother had structured it. I am not living there yet. I am not ready to. But I have driven past it twice, and both times I sat in the car for a few minutes looking at the oak tree in the front yard that she planted the year my father was born, which is now taller than the house. At Carver and Moss, I work on residential and small commercial projects. I am not the most senior person in the room. I am learning things I could not have learned anywhere else, from people who treat competence as a shared resource rather than a threat. Last month I caught a load-bearing miscalculation in a set of plans that would have required a full foundation correction 18 months into build. My supervisor looked at the markup and said, quietly, "Good catch." That was enough. Some things don't recover on a timeline. They recover when they're ready and not before. The pencil case still smells faintly of cedar from the box it spent 2 years sitting in. I notice it every time I open it. I think that's the point, that the things people leave us carry the smell of where they've been, and we carry that forward into rooms they never got to see. If this story felt familiar to you, if you've ever had someone else's words standing between you and where you were supposed to be, share it with someone who needs to hear it.